Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. We're exactly on time today. It's such a historic day. Here with Aaron Mate, who needs no introduction. I'm Max Blumenthal. And we are asking everyone today to please respect the process, because process matters. Process matters. International law doesn't. How's it going, Aaron? I heard you were a little under the weather, and I'm glad you could make it today.
Well, I was under the weather, but it certainly lifted my spirits to see you and Sam Husseini confront the genocider in chief, the secretary of genocide, as you call him, Tony Blinken. And for those who missed it, that's what Max was just invoking when he talked about respecting the process. When Sam Husseini today at the State Department was questioning Secretary Blinken about his support for genocide, Blinken said to him, "Please respect the process." The guy who's been responsible for presiding over the most flagrant violation of international law in my lifetime, a year-long plus genocide of a defenseless death camp, is talking about respecting the process. So that's what Max was just sarcastically invoking, and it was very refreshing to see what happened today, which of course we're going to spend a lot of today focusing on.
Yeah, and it's making headlines. We'll talk about why. Aaron, if you could pump up the volume a little bit, just a little, or these are like directional mics, so I just want to make sure we're uniform. So yeah, this is how it went down today. I was actually at the briefing yesterday, and of just Matt Miller, the press secretary, announcing the ceasefire. It was delayed by an hour because the announcement was coming in, and the Biden administration had to give the big announcement to Biden in the Rose Garden. So the White House took the lead, and it was rumored that Blinken would be coming in today, the following day, but we didn't know for sure. And Blinken had just spoken at the Atlantic Council, which is this think tank in downtown DC, which is the unofficial think tank of NATO, sort of the base of transatlanticism in Washington, sponsored by the arms industry, by NATO itself, as well as by the United Arab Emirates and various pro-Israel Israeli interests. And Blinken was interrupted there multiple times by the heroic activists who camped out outside his mansion on Chainbridge Road in Northern Virginia day after day over the course of this genocide. Several of those activists got in the room. So I was actually unsure whether Blinken would decide to do another curtain call after that experience, which, it also earned headlines. The heckling earned the headlines. No one really cared about Blinken's excuses and blaming of Palestinians for their own destruction. And yet he decided, we learned at like 9:30 a.m. today that Blinken was coming back in. And so, the whole press corps showed up. And I have been going to these briefings over the past year. And after a few questions, getting a few questions in, having to edge my way in, they just wouldn't call on me anymore. I always followed the process. I always respected the process. I didn't interrupt. Didn't want to especially interrupt other reporters. And I went in the normal way. I went in with a day pass. Sam Husseini went in with a hard pass. He has like full State Department credentials. And we thought that it was extremely important to stage a humanitarian intervention in the final press conference of Tony Blinken. So we'll show you what it looked like if you haven't already seen, though I assume most of you have. But, here's one for the record, for the history books. And this is decensored news put together, a really nice edit of my intervention.
I have even greater respect, even greater appreciation for you asking the tough questions, for you holding us to account, being on the receiving end. Sometimes that's not always the most comfortable thing. not always the most enjoyable thing, but it is the most necessary thing.
300
democracy.
reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in
I'm
May?
happy to address
we
questions.
all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address
Why did you
questions when we get a
sacrifice
chance.
the
Thank you.
rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow
I'm
my
happy to
friends' homes
address,
in
your
Gaza to be
questions
destroyed
when
when we had
when
a
we get to
deal
questions. Thank
in
you.
May?
Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating
Yeah, I
it
have a
with
statement.
fascism.
Yeah, I have a statement to make.
You
Thank you.
waved the white flag before
We'll have the time to take
Netanyahu.
questions at the end.
You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
We'll have
I
the
look
time
forward
to
to
take
taking
questions
questions
at
when
the
I
end.
get a chance
Father-in-law
to
was an
finish my
Israel
statement.
lobbyist. Your
Thank you.
grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirked through the whole thing every day. You smirked through a genocide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that Matt Miller just conveniently showed up at the end.
It's good timing.
I mean, I was like, this couldn't actually work out better, that Matt Miller is trying to see me out the door.
What I love is your intervention comes just as Anthony Blinken is doing his like performative sucking up to the media about how you ask the hard questions, and it's not always great to be on the receiving end, but it's vital for our democracy. And then you actually ask him a tough question that he never actually receives, or else he never would be up there in the first place. And also talk about how people of Gaza, including journalists, have been on the receiving end of his bombs, and that's just such a devastating rebuke. And those questions at the end, how does it feel that your legacy is genocide? That is the key question. And no one's asked them that yet. That's the first time he's ever been asked that.
Yeah, I mean, there was the interview with Lulu Garcia Navarro from the New York Times where she sort of politely suggested that some may consider what happened in Gaza genocide. Yeah. But, she had to be so respectful to him and then allow him to slyly slither his way out. But it would be so easy to trap him on that issue of genocide itself, whether it's a genocide, because he just declared that Sudan was a genocide while he's holding secret meetings with the United Arab Emirates, which is backing the RSF in Sudan that he's accusing of genocide. And he's holding meetings with the UAE on establishing a technocratic dictatorship in the Gaza Strip to control Palestinians and prevent them from resisting the Zionist project. So, I mean, it would just be so easy to trap him, but nobody dares. And at the press briefing the day before with Matthew Miller, reporter after reporter was thanking him for his work. They would all have to preface all their questions with, "Thank you for the work that you've done and for taking our questions." And he was just smiling his way through and no smirking. He was just like, I really enjoyed this robust exchange we've had. And it's like a play acting of democracy when the institution of the State Department is fundamentally and irredeemably implicated in the Holocaust of our time. And these figures are playing the same role that Julius Streicher and Joseph Goebbels played in the previous one. And they're getting treated with total respect. What is it? The fourth wall? The fourth wall has to be broken in that situation. And I really have I've played out that scenario in my head so many times over the past year. How would I challenge Tony Blinken? How would I confront him? What questions would I ask? And there were some questions I forgot to ask there, but I think one of the key questions is also, why did you go to Israel on your first trip to help manage this genocide where you sat in the Hakiria complex, their version of the Pentagon in the middle of Tel Aviv, in their war room, and announced that you were there as a Jew? That's what he said. I am here as a Jew, not as a diplomat. You forfeit any leverage you might have had there, and you side with Israel on an ethno-religious basis. And that goes to the heart of who Tony Blinken is. As I mentioned, his father-in-law, Samuel Pisar, was a Israel lobbyist in France, where Tony Blinken was actually raised. He wasn't raised in, the American heartland. He was the consigliere to Francois Mitterrand as like his Jewish fixer. He was also the fixer for Robert Maxwell, a Mossad agent who was the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. And Tony Blinken's grandfather also produced one of the first reports on the feasibility of colonizing Palestine. He ran an institute which funded that. So he played an instrumental role in founding apartheid Israel. Blinken has invoked this again and again. It's not something he hides. And this should be a question he should be asked. How can someone like that be a diplomat when you're fundamentally compromised by and sort of religiously connected to a state that is slaughtering people at an industrial capacity? It's just he should have never been allowed to be in that position. It shows something just fundamentally wrong with our foreign policy establishment. So I was able to get that question out and to just lay before his feet the deliberate assassination of hundreds of journalists in the Gaza Strip, the destruction of the homes of friends of mine, like the journalist Shadi Abdul Rahman, who's been on our stream before, who cannot return to Gaza. His home was totally destroyed that he worked his whole life for. His wife stays up crying about the fact that she'll never be able to go back to Gaza. His kids ask, when are we going home? When are we going home? Rifat Al-Arir never got to say goodbye to him, was DMing with him days before he was deliberately assassinated in Shujaiya by the Israeli military with US-made weapons at his home for social media posts. Israel killed so many social media influencers, so many noble people of Gaza, professors, intellectuals, doctors, and it did so deliberately. And, I should have called out his name. I wanted to call out his name, but got to lay that at Tony Blinken's feet. And in some ways that was cathartic. And I wanted to ask him whether he would be returning to West Exec Advisors, his boutique consulting firm, which has cashed in on contracts with Israeli spy tech firms, including one that he handed to former White House press secretary and now MSNBC host Jen Psaki. Will he be cashing in on this genocide as well as on the Ukraine proxy war, where he's obstructed a peace process there again and again? So for me, it was just the most I could do. I felt like I had a responsibility to do it because I was able to get in that room. Many other reporters and other people couldn't. Many other people are dead. Other reporters are dead because of Tony Blinken. And so, I don't know, that was the best I could do. And I think you can see from the reaction to it that it struck a nerve. It struck a chord with lots of people around the world. And I'm hearing from people around the world, including in Gaza, who, felt like I guess it spoke for them. They wanted to say some of those same things.
Yeah.
And Tony Blinken, really, it's unusual for a Secretary of State in the U.S. to have that kind of global recognition and also to be regarded so universally as a villain, especially a sort of dour and unspectacular character like Blinken. I mean, it's really remarkable.
Well, he's soulless in the way his eyes are so dead in the way he speaks, because he's turned into a sociopath. And going back to what you were talking about in terms of his actual record, being on the ground right after October 7th and basically taking part in the Israeli government's planning of its destruction of Gaza, he later admitted that Netanyahu told him that we don't want to allow a single aspirin into Gaza. Netanyahu told him this directly, but yet Blinken went out in public and spun on Israel's behalf, saying that Israel was not blocking humanitarian aid. There are reports that he approved or he endorsed Israel's plans to target aid trucks, which certainly Israel has done, even killing Blinken's friends at World Central Kitchen, which was delivering food inside Gaza. There's the documented fact that he censored the reports of his own experts who told him that Israel is blocking aid, and he went before Congress and lied and said the opposite. So this is someone who has been, has a long record, very well documented, of just outright complicity in one of the worst crimes in human history. And again, we're talking about a mass murder campaign against a defenseless death camp going on for more than a year. And even, what was it, a week ago, the State Department, Blinken's State Department, announced another $8 billion in weapons to Israel. So up until the last second, he's been doing his part in facilitating this genocide. And so it's, seeing him being called out today directly, I can see why there's so much gratitude for you and Sam around the world, Max, because you guys were giving voice to a message that's been silenced for so long, which is that Blinken himself personifies the Biden administration's complicity in this genocide. And the media, the people who, most media in that room who've been asking him questions have not been holding him to account. So this was a rare moment where some minimal accountability happened.
Yeah, minimal accountability is really the best we can do. And we're going to talk about in detail how Blinken, Biden, and the backers of this genocide obstructed a ceasefire deal that was on the table and was accepted by Hamas, by the Qataris, by the Egyptians, and how Netanyahu was never pressured. We're gonna get into the details of that. This humanitarian intervention by me and Sam Husseini was carried to a national audience on MSNBC and CNN because they were broadcasting Tony Blinken's press conference at the time. And Sam Husseini has been coming to these briefings again and again, and he asks he asks questions that no other reporter asks. And he doesn't only ask about Israel, Palestine, but they're all questions that the public deserves answers to. And Matt Miller has shut Sam down for months and months, refusing to call on him. And so the only way he can get a word in is by waiting for the pause between other reporters who are in the so-called bullpen, where they're like the full-time credentialed mainstream media reporters who always get called on, to see if Miller will respond to him. And what actually happened was Sam tried to get a question in, just a valid question, into Blinken, something that Helen Thomas might have asked back when she was occupying the bullpen space for the AP that Matt Lee now occupies. And he was shut down. And not only that, Matt Miller called the cops on Sam Husseini to physically remove him. And so this wound up on CNN. We can show multiple angles of this, but this is one that really dominated coverage because it was more visually impactful than my intervention.
Is the enlargement of those Abraham Accords.
And we have, I think, video of another angle of what happened there in the press room at the State Department. Let's watch.
About Israel's nuclear weapons, everybody from the ICJ, I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking questions. Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders.
We still respect the process.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you about Israel?
Great question. And I mean, it's amazing to watch Sam, like the amount of physical stress that he's under there, having 3 gigantic Secret Service cops bundling him out the door, like suffocating him. And he's able to cite the ICJ and Amnesty International and then summon the strength to ask, why are you not in the Hague? I meant to belt out Nuremberg 2.0 too, but then Matt Miller showed up in my face and that was just a target of opportunity. But I thought that was pretty impressive by Sam. And if you actually watch the State Department briefing feed, you can hear him clearly because he was right up front. I was all the way in the back. And Sam is really a national treasure. I mean, he's been working in journalism and in fostering an anti-war and independent journalistic environment in Washington for decades. So I thought it was great to see Sam go out like that after being frozen out day after day by the by the Biden team, by the Biden Blinken team.
Well,
CNN, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of my favorite clips of this day is the way CNN talked about you and Sam's intervention, basically taking offense at a Secretary of State being held accountable for presiding over a genocide. And their reaction to you guys is very telling, both in terms of how they've whitewashed this genocide, but also in why I think they don't have any viewers anymore, because they see themselves as government hacks, taking offense on the government's behalf at being asked real questions about their complicity in mass murder.
Yeah, this really is a dissonant reaction by the corporate state media hacks at CNN. Just take a look. It says everything about our corporate media. I think this is one of the most emblematic segments of corporate media that you're going to see.
As you heard, he was repeatedly interrupted by some cringeworthy heckling by activists. I mean, we were both sitting here pretty stunned, frankly. This is supposed to be a press conference with a room of journalists. Those were activists who were interrupting the Secretary of State when he initially was thanking the press and talking about the Israeli-Hamas deal.
Yeah, I think it's really surprising. A lot of our viewers will have seen protests on Capitol Hill, for example, during confirmation hearings, but it's very rare for something like that to happen at the State Department. I'm over there all the time in that briefing room, and you need to have a reason.
Never seen him in the briefing room.
To be at the State Department, you need to have an appointment. You need to have press accreditation,
which we had
to come and go. So it's unclear who those people were. So I think there's a real security question there. Oh
yeah, we're terrorists. We're a security threat.
Me to be cheesy for a moment. This is a testament to American democracy and
yeah, you're cheesy.
The way that American administrations approach their press rooms. They give accreditation to a wide number of journalists, and increasingly what I would call less mainstream journalists, more opinion journalists, who have the opportunity to go to the State Department, to go to the White House, and to ask questions of the representatives of that administration. So I'm always amazed by whenever I go to these different press rooms.
Max, pause for a second.
Who's actually sitting there.
He's bragging about American democracy while this on screen they're showing a journalist being dragged out of the room by 3 police officers. It's like, pick your moment to be cheesy.
Or just, I mean, what are we protesting?
Yeah.
Who, I mean, there's so much you could say. Why did Biden lose the election? Because people share our outrage at this policy. And no one could address it inside the room.
It's not just Americans, it's people from all over the world, from Turkey, from China, from South Korea, who get to ask questions of people like Matt Miller at the State Department or Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House.
Jean-Pierre.
And so there's a relatively open policy for now in these different press rooms.
As they're dragging a man from the press room. It's, the dissonance is so funny. He doesn't even acknowledge Sam as as a journalist or as a person worthy of respect. So it doesn't occur to him that he's like kissing the feet of the state while the state is dragging out a journalist, because to him that's just totally normal.
It's
pontificate about it.
I mean, you can see another angle of Sam here.
You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking questions. Wasn't.
Yeah, once again, I mean, Sam was asking a question and then he stopped talking. He stopped saying anything. And that's when Matt Miller sent in these cops to remove him because they don't want those questions to be allowed there. Just as they don't want any dissent to be taking place inside the State Department. But I mean, what you saw there with CNN was one institution, the $800 million premier corporate state media mighty Wurlitzer of the U.S. military intelligence apparatus, manufacturing consent for a genocide after October 7th, spouting the lies out of the Israeli prime minister's office about 40 beheaded babies, about mass sexual assault by Hamas, savagery, etc. featuring only the arch Zionists in their newsroom, Wolf Blitzer, former AIPAC researcher, Jake Tapper, Dana Bash. And then at the end of the whole thing, when the ceasefire is right there, ready to be signed, they start running cover to prevent accountability for one of the key authors of that genocide. And that's what it's all about for CNN. The only time they challenge policy is when it doesn't go far enough in the service of the military or Wall Street. That's the only time they do it. And everybody sees that. So, I was also, MSNBC also carried my interruption. And I think it's great that I finally got back on MSNBC after all these years. I was once on Maddow like 20 years ago. Too bad nobody was watching, because nobody watches MSNBC. There's like 20 boomers watching that.
CNN also, just again, we're probably missing a lot, but they also spun the lies about Al-Shifa Hospital. The fake claim of a Hamas command center under Al-Shifa, and that paved the way for Israel to destroy Gaza's largest hospital and then proceed to destroy and target every single other hospital in Gaza. That was CNN as well, along with many other outlets. The host, Dana Bash, basically constantly claiming is that Jewish college students in the U.S. were facing another Kristallnacht type situation, on and on and on. So that's CNN. And so no surprise that they're offended by journalists actually trying to hold Antony Blinken to account.
Yeah, Reuters did a pretty fair write-up, but if you look, I don't know, can you see this on you can't see it on StreamYard, but if you look at the URL of this, there's some nice ping pong tables for sale. I wish I had room for one of those. Journalists berate Blinken over Gaza policy at his final press conference. The URL says hecklers interrupt Blinken over Gaza policy. So they changed us to journalists, which was nice. The New York Post gave us a fair write-up, even though they're like one of the major ultra-Zionist yellow tabloids. I guess because they hate Blinken more than us. And CBS News reported it. AOL. It's all over the wires and everywhere else. But CNN attempted to denigrate us as activists. There's obviously nothing wrong with being an activist. But I think me and Sam Husseini have more real journalistic experience than that bottle blonde hack and that blow-dried himbo in there, who's obviously like some kind of State Department asset. He's like posing as like the State Department spokesman. And, if they want, I will come in studio live and we can just compare our journalistic experience, mine against theirs. And we'll talk about who's opinionated and who's objective. I think that was one of the more revealing comments too, is that we're opinion journalists. CNN, they don't have opinions there. Like the opinion on CNN was kill, 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 kill after October 7th. It wasn't really something they were holding back.
Yeah, and they're activists. What is Dana Bash or Jake Tapper other than a full-on activist for Israel? When they devote all their segments or most of their segments on Israel to spitting Israeli propaganda, that's activism. CNN by definition is an activist network. And again, nothing wrong with being an activist, but for CNN to use that in a pejorative way, when simply Blinken's being asked questions that other people, including the activists at CNN, won't ask, they're just revealing their own activism on behalf of Israel.
Yeah. And that's over. It's over. Like nobody believes them anymore.
Yeah.
It's just so I don't know how else they'll try to come back at us for that. I think it's just over. It's over for Blinken. Biden will go off into that night after leaving the White House, and his administration will be seen as disgraceful and ignominious. One of the reasons I think why the wires and like places that never really respected us at the Grayzone, and the feelings mutual, why they're treating us sort of fairly is that they share our disgust with the Gaza policy. it's pretty mainstream now to be disgusted with the policy of the Biden administration vis-a-vis Gaza. You know, you even have Trump influencers on social media proudly boasting that it was Trump who got the ceasefire. I mean, the right-wing religious nationalist fanatics in Israel are outraged that there's a ceasefire, but you have Trump's core group of influencers pointing to this as like a signal achievement by Donald Trump. That really shows you how mainstream it is. And we've been calling for a ceasefire for a long time. Actually, I was in the briefing room on October 7th with Sam Husseini, and we were hammering Matt Miller then, a day after, or sorry, it was October 12th. On October 12th, because Israel was already beginning to fully destroy Gaza City and its leadership was calling for genocide of the Amalek. And they were openly saying it. And Miller just berated us. So we wanted the deal that should have always been there, that could have saved so many lives, including Israeli lives. Hirsch Goldberg Pollen, I think his parents spoke at the Democratic convention, who were in favor of a ceasefire. He would be alive if Blinken had actually wanted a deal, but they didn't. And we'll talk about why. Anything else you want to add here on the issue of our humanitarian intervention? You had a great one, by the way, Aaron. You were first with Chris Coons in the quiet car, Senator Chris Coons, who actually is basically like Biden's wingman in Delaware. So you got to Biden's proxy.
Yeah, and you see what happens when people are confronted directly is they have no answer. They have absolutely nothing. I mean, like what did Chris Coons say? Nothing. He tried to avoid the question for the first few minutes of our standoff. And same with, what can Blinken say now? And I just hope he continues to be confronted over this for the rest of his life. That's the least he deserves, is to be questioned over his integral role in a genocide. And so this was a great way to start off Blinken's post-government career. And certainly I hope he's never allowed to return to government. His record is disqualifying. Not that he's unique in that respect, but as a Secretary of State, your job is to be a diplomat, and his job, he treated it as basically being a arms dealer. He facilitated Israel's genocide, and he went around the world in Ukraine trying to get weapons for Ukraine rather than trying to negotiate peace. So I think it's fair to call him one of the worst, if not the worst, Secretary of States in history. And this was a great way, I think, a fitting send-off for him in that role.
Well, respect to you for confronting Chris Coons, and to all the activists out there, especially my friends at Kibbutz Blinken. They were camping out in the cold and the rain and the heat, just trying to get that message across that Tony Blinken was responsible for a titanic crime, the crime of the century. And it's not easy to do that, to educate the public about the culpability of such a dour, soft-spoken, previously unknown government bureaucrat, political functionary, partisan operative, and they succeeded, and it's gone international. And so this is how he will be remembered. We all did what we could. I feel like everybody did what they could. Everybody watching this did whatever was in their power. We're living in an era where there's no accountability for our military and financial elite. And people are celebrating vigilantism. Not what I did. I didn't even see that as a vigilante act. We just didn't respect the process, but we were credentialed to be in there. But we're talking about real vigilantism. And it's because nobody is ever held accountable. No one was held accountable for the Iraq War. No one was even held accountable for the financial crisis. No bankers were jailed. None of the banksters. The healthcare industry just gouging consumers, denying them healthcare wherever they can. No one's ever, do you ever see CEOs get jailed or investigated? Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family that basically presided over a genocide across the heartland of the US through the opioid crisis. And they are single-handedly almost responsible for the opioid crisis. What happened to them? They got like a slap on the wrist, and their names are still on art galleries around the country. One of the major art galleries in DC still bears their name. So everybody just feels like, what can we do? Well, we're doing it. And, it may not actually stop the genocide, but it does something. It matters. And I think the task now is to not let these figures reintegrate themselves into society, into professorships and fellowships, and having their names on battleships. Well, I guess that is appropriate. George W. Bush and Bill Clinton just got them. Perfect sign of the times, especially Bush. I mean, one of the biggest military bunglers in American history just got an aircraft carrier named after him. So don't forget about Gaza and keep the pressure on. They're going to be out there. Keep the pressure on. Don't let them forget. And yeah, there is a ceasefire. We don't know how long it's going to go for, whether it will just sort of be a temporary ceasefire. I think that October 7th unleashed a new phase of warfare in the Israel-Palestine, what's called a conflict, what I would call kind of a crisis or a nightmare. And that we are going to be witnessing continuous warfare at different levels until one side defeats the other militarily. That's just where we're at, because there are no breaks on that process. The breaks would come from the so-called rules-based order that sponsors Israel and provides it with complete escalation dominance, but it's not going to, at least in the near term. So we don't know where this ceasefire will go. People are celebrating in Gaza, obviously, because they survived, because they want to go back home, they want to rebuild, and because they resisted. And their resistance takes the form not just of armed resistance, which was continuing to the end, with operations taking place in areas that the Israeli military said they cleared months ago, but also just the sheer display of steadfastness by figures like Dr. Hussam Abu Sofia from Kamal Adwan Hospital, who is now in an Israeli torture dungeon. He had to be arrested, and the hospital had to be burned by Israel because they wanted to remove all centers of life, because their plan was to annex and ethnically cleanse the north of Gaza. And the people who stayed in northern Gaza under the most intense bombardment, starvation, and who continued to tend to wounded people in that hospital, the last active hospital in northern Gaza, they are the true face of resistance. And they succeeded because Israel is now, at least for the time being, not able to ethnically cleanse and annex the north of Gaza as they had hoped. So in one sense, it is a victory for resistance. There are also celebrations in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem by Jewish Israelis who want their captives and hostages to come back. These are the terms of the deal. But the deal is elastic because Netanyahu is trying to bend it as we speak. Full withdrawal toward the border from all areas of the Gaza Strip. The border is something that will likely be interpreted very loosely by the Israeli military. Opening of the Rafah crossing, that's the crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, where that's where most human traffic goes in and out. That had been destroyed and taken over by Israel. Travel of the wounded for treatment abroad. 600 aid trucks a day will enter daily. I think the number was like 100 or 150, just a few weeks ago. 200,000 tents and 60,000 caravans will be brought in for shelter. The tents were being sold on the black market in Gaza, and a lot of people were unable to afford them. Caravans are like mobile homes. And we've been, since 2014, seeing entire neighborhoods consisting of caravans that look like very threadbare trailer parks in areas destroyed by Israel. We're going to see a lot more of those. And those are really difficult to live in during the hot months. They're not very well ventilated. Prisoner exchange, 1,000 prisoners from Gaza will come out, and hundreds of prisoners sentenced to life and high sentences. So that's like the hardest part for Israel to bear, is the security prisoners coming out. I wonder if one of them will be Marwan Barghouti, clearing the occupation prisoners of all women and children under 19 years old. I mean, that would be enormous if that took place. And this is also, it's why the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas took women prisoners and took prisoners took captives who were minors on October 7th, was to exchange for the hundreds and hundreds of children who are in Israeli prisons. Withdrawal from the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphia corridor gradually. The Netzarim corridor is a de facto military base cutting off the north of Gaza from the rest of the Gaza Strip, and it was intended to prevent the population of the north from existing, and it was also a base for Israel to stage attacks all across the Gaza Strip. It's fortified. It's like a kilometer wide. And that would be hugely significant if that were removed. The Philadelphia corridor is between Egypt and Gaza. And Netanyahu is insisting that there be a force there right now. That's a huge source of contention. Return of all displaced persons to their areas of residence and freedom of movement throughout Gaza. That would be a major defeat for Israel, trying to keep everybody out of the north, out of Jabalia and those areas. Absence over aircraft over Gaza for 8 to 10 hours daily. Israel has maintained a total presence of drones and F-16s over Gaza 24 hours a day since October 7th. Rehabilitation of all hospitals, field hospitals, medical and surgical teams to Gaza, as we've seen. Removing the hospitals as centers of life was key to Israel's ethnic cleansing strategy. So this will be a term that I think will also be painful for Israel, and also speaks to the savagery and insanity of it, that they would fight to prevent hospitals from being restored. And then there's going to be a phased exchange of prisoners and phased withdrawal. And, you know, these phases are the dangerous part, as we've seen ever since the dawn of the peace process, when there aren't final borders established immediately or final benchmarks established immediately. Israel always tries to bend them and violate them. But on the 22nd day, the Israeli army is supposed to evacuate from most of Gaza. We'll see how it goes. We also have the Lebanon ceasefire, which Israel's violating and claiming, Hezbollah is rearming. They're restoring their ability to act as a social movement. And there may be a new war in Lebanon by April, for all we know. That deal is up in like a month. Aaron, thoughts on the ceasefire deal?
Well, as you discussed, the question is whether Israel will actually implement it or just use it as an excuse, a cover to continue to carry out atrocities. Already, Netanyahu is saying that Hamas is using blackmail, although he didn't specify over what. And of course, I just reflexively think anything he says is a lie. It's Israel that has always imposed new conditions that they knew Hamas couldn't accept to make a deal impossible. And now it seems already, from what I can understand, they're basically already trying to back off of their commitment to withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor, which they want to retain control over. And if they won't do that, if they won't meet up to that part of the deal, then it's just hard to see how anything goes into effect. And Netanyahu delayed a vote on the deal with his cabinet, although apparently now it will happen on Friday. So we'll see. But then, you know, if it goes through, then people like, I believe, Ben Gvir have threatened to quit.
He quit.
He did quit. Okay, wow. He did quit already. So but then there's a question of whether Netanyahu's government survives. And if it doesn't survive, can this deal even go through? I mean, that's the problem with a country that is founded on ethnic cleansing and has only grown more extreme as a result. It's now in the control of such fanatics that someone like Netanyahu and his government is like the moderate. An extremist like Netanyahu is a moderate in the context of his own cabinet. So can you actually have a deal with this kind of government? That really remains to be seen. The decisive factor could be the U.S. And certainly under Biden, there was no meaningful pressure at all. And we'll talk, I guess, a bit more whether Trump really did change the equation. Some people are saying that Trump did make the difference. Some Gulf officials have said that basically Trump did more for this deal than Biden did. Trump in a few days did more for this deal than Biden did in more than a year. And some Israeli officials have said the same thing. But once Trump takes office, will he really apply any meaningful pressure on Netanyahu? I'm pretty skeptical of that.
Great points. I want to kind of segment that out. We should do a segment on Trump's role in the deal and the debate over whether Trump did this. And then I want to kind of do an analysis, maybe somewhat chronologically, on how the Biden administration and specifically Blinken blocked the deal and wound up kind of giving Trump an alley-oop, which is just kind of ironic because they always wanted credit, but it seemed like they just couldn't stop enjoying the slaughter. But as you mentioned, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the most fanatically religious nationalist, messianic member of Netanyahu's cabinet, who's holding it together when it was a much less durable coalition prior to October 7th, at a high point of protest against Netanyahu over the judicial reform. He needed Ben-Gvir and Smotrich from the Otzma Yehudit, or Jewish Power Party, which is a fascist party in Israel, inspired by Meir Kahane. He needed them to hold his coalition together, and they wound up having Netanyahu by the short and curlies. And Itamar Ben-Gvir has boasted in the past 72 hours that again and again, those are his exact words, he prevented a ceasefire deal. This is while Biden and Blinken were blaming Hamas for everything. Now Ben-Gvir has resigned, as he promised to do if there were a ceasefire, and he's leading the fascist resistance from the outside. And as you said, Aaron, Netanyahu is now the radical center of Israeli politics, and Yair Lapid, who is his sort of chief rival, the loyal Zionist opposition, has promised to bolster Netanyahu's party to support the ceasefire. So Netanyahu does have a lot of political latitude to enforce a ceasefire deal. We just don't totally know what the terms will be. And, before we, I guess, look at how the role Trump played, I think we should listen to Trump's national security advisor, incoming national security advisor, Mike Waltz, on how the war could just be restarted again at any second, despite a ceasefire.
Number two, we've made it very clear to the Israelis, and I want the people of Israel to hear me on this. If they need to go back in, we're with them. If Hamas doesn't live up to the terms of this agreement, we are with them. Hamas is not going to continue as a military entity, and it certainly is not going to govern Gaza, Brett. So, I mean, I want people to hear that crystal clear.
We often talk
and
about.
by the way, Brett, I mean, this is President Trump who took out Soleimani, who took out Baghdadi. I think all these terrorist organizations understand now the type of man and the type of leader that they're dealing with.
Yeah, interesting comments, not just because he stated very clearly that Israel can just launch another war at any moment, but also because he declared that it was Hamas that had to live up to its end of the obligations on the ceasefire deal, even though Hamas was not supposed to be still able to govern at this point or even exist, as Netanyahu promised total victory. So he kind of acknowledged a major strategic defeat on that point for Israel. And then he says that Hamas cannot have any military capacity in Gaza. Well, good luck with that. I mean, take a look at the victory celebrations. There are Hamas flags everywhere. They are a mass movement. They are a mass-based social movement in the Gaza Strip. They're not going anywhere. And their leadership is being replaced just as the ranks of the Al-Qassam brigades are being replaced.
Yeah, and sorry if I missed it, but Blinken, like, what did Blinken just say the other day? He said that their ranks have grown.
Yeah.
You know, that was like another example of just again, putting aside the fact that it's a genocide, even from the point of view of Israeli-U.S. goals of destroying Hamas. And Blinken ends his tenure by saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, Hamas's ranks have grown," because when you slaughter people, destroy their families, destroy their society, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to want to fight back, and their opportunity to do that is through Hamas. And so that's why Blinken now has to admit that Hamas has more fighters than before.
Yeah. Yep. Which is, what was the point? What was the point of killing everyone? You simultaneously say that Hamas has been degraded and has been its capacity for fighting is reduced by 80%, and you then declare that it has 23,000 fighters in the field, that it's replenished its ranks, what were they supposed to have started at 30,000? So, I mean, Netanyahu's statistics on having eliminated tens of thousands of them is bunk. What was the point? So we had this deal. The deal arrived. When is Inauguration Day? There are fences everywhere in DC, so it's coming up soon, very soon. In a matter of days, Donald Trump will be president of the United States, and Joe Biden will be staring at a wall, drooling somewhere in Delaware. And Trump is getting the credit, somewhat justifiably, for this ceasefire. This is how the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported it. Late Friday evening, Steve Witkoff, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, called from Qatar to tell Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's aides that he would be coming to Israel the following afternoon. The aides politely explained that was in the middle of the Sabbath, but that the Prime Minister would gladly meet him Saturday night. Witkoff's blunt reaction took them by surprise. He explained to them in salty English. I wonder what his salty English was. Tell the fucking Shabbos goy to turn on your TV. That Shabbat was of no interest to him. His message was loud and clear. Thus, in an unusual departure from official practice, the Prime Minister showed up at his office for an official meeting with Witkoff, who then returned to Qatar to seal the deal. And, you know, all through Israel, they have Shabbat elevators where it stops on every floor without you having to push a button. And Netanyahu is not even religious. Yeah. He doesn't even believe in the Jewish God Yahweh. He believes in Satan, but I don't think he's religious. He's not known to observe the Sabbath. So it's just a way of trying to screw with the Americans again. And they told him it wasn't business as usual. And Netanyahu has a closer relationship with Trump, but Trump is also sort of unpredictable. Chaim Levinson, who is a columnist for Haaretz, someone from the liberal enlightened public who became somewhat genocidal after October 7th. And, you know, what I'm saying is he's not like an anti-war leftist. This was his characterization of what Donald Trump did. There was no deal. LOL. The great and huge Donald Trump took Netanyahu's hand, bent it behind his back, then bent it a little more, then pushed his head on the table, then whispered in his ear that he would kick his balls in a moment. It's a shame Biden didn't realize this a long time ago. Do you accept this analysis, Aaron?
The problem is Biden's been so feckless and so slavishly complicit that, yeah, it actually is quite possible that maybe Trump not wanting to have this going on before coming into office did actually apply some pressure, and that forced Netanyahu's hand. But there are many other alternative explanations. You know, as we've discussed, Netanyahu is very tight with Miriam Adelson, who's one of Trump's top donors. So maybe Netanyahu wanted to give Trump a win. And Israeli officials are playing along with this narrative that Trump forced their hand to basically give Trump a win, knowing that once Trump takes office, they'll be free to do whatever they want. So but then you look at how awful Biden has been and just how they refuse to use any leverage. And you think actually it's quite possible that just one threat from the Trump team via his Middle East envoy made a difference. I'm open to anything at this point, just given how awful Biden has been. And certainly Biden's been so bad that it just makes anything possible. It does. It really does. Because Biden's been like uniquely devoted to Israeli mass murder, talking about his emotional connection to Israel. Does Trump have that same emotional connection on a personal level? No. He just cares about real estate deals.
Yeah.
But whereas Biden actually believes in his soul about the importance of Israel as a U.S. client state. He's talked about that his whole career. So
yeah, what does Biden say? If we didn't have Israel, if there was no Israel, we'd have to invent it.
Yeah, like does Trump believe that? No, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. So, and certainly there've been enough sources, not just coming from Israel. I mean, Gulf states have said this as well, who were involved in brokering these talks, that Trump made a difference. So, yeah, I actually am open to believing it. But again, the real proof will be once Trump takes office, whether anything really changes then.
I wasn't planning on playing this, but since Biden's leaving, this is who he is. This is 1986.
If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
So that's what, 1986? That we say?
Yeah, back when he could form sentences.
So what is Israel doing for the U.S. at that time? One of the things they're doing is they're running guns to death squads in Central America after Congress put some curbs on the Reagan administration's dirty wars there. So, and there's a great book on this by Andrew and Leslie Coburn, Dangerous Liaison. They talked about this. That's why I think Biden was so enthusiastic about Israel. And also they were helping out with also helping to help apartheid South Africa on the U.S.'s behalf when the U.S. also couldn't do that without attracting congressional pushback. So
helping them get nuclear technology.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why he's so gung-ho about Israel back then.
Yeah, that's Joe Biden. And there are other, we'll get into why the Biden administration really loved this war, learned to really love this war, while pretending that, as AOC said, they were working tirelessly for a ceasefire. But I think you're right, Aaron, that there's another dimension, which is that Netanyahu did want Trump to get the win for the ceasefire and not Biden. But the Biden team, by holding off for 8 months on the same deal that was signed, this is the same deal that was put on the table on May 26th. They gave the win to Trump as well. But Donald Trump himself does not want to enter office with an open-ended conflict that could lead to regional warfare. So there are many factors here. I also think that Netanyahu now wants to focus on the West Bank, to crushing the resistance in the northern West Bank, in Jenin and Tulkarm. And Netanyahu is going to the extent that there ever were any breaks at all, Netanyahu is going to give him carte blanche to do whatever he wants there. And the West Bank is also, has been constantly undergoing a process of colonization, which a lot of religious nationalist fanatics in Israel wanted to restore to Gaza, but they're going to have to postpone that. So I think we're going to see the West Bank get significantly worse in the coming year. And that's why we have to keep our attention on Palestine. It won't be getting the same headlines that Gaza got, at least initially.
Something similar happened when Obama was inaugurated the first time in 2009. At that point, Israel was carrying out a massacre in Gaza. And the Obama team told Israel to wrap it up, that they didn't want to have the Gaza massacre then distract from their, celebration of Obama's inauguration. So Israel knocked it off because Israel listens to the U.S. when it comes down to it. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's what Trump did this time too. But again, we'll see what Trump actually does when he's in power. I mean, the people he's appointed around him are all pro-Israel fanatics, and there's no reason to think they'll be any different than the Biden administration. It's just the question is, Biden himself he's in cognitive decline and a lifelong committed Israel supporter. Maybe Trump will see the benefits in just from a transactional point of view, politically, of that being so devoted to Israel won't help him, and maybe in that there's hope that he'll be better than Biden.
We'll be watching. Someone, thank you for the super chat, accused us of coping by not giving Trump credit and didn't seem to notice that we read the Haaretz article live. There are others who are actually coping. This is, an annoying term I don't like to use. Coping, and not just coping, but like being deceptive about what they have always been saying in order to deny the reality that Donald Trump got this deal or played a part in getting this deal when they were all telling us that Donald Trump was going to somehow make Gaza worse when it was already the Auschwitz of our time. And here's one of them who will be familiar to all viewers of this show. Certainly the most annoying one, Mehdi Hassan. Some of us said, I don't know, should I say it in a British accent? Some of us said a year ago that the US president has the power to impose a deal and a ceasefire on Netanyahu and Israel. Yes, he was telling you, if President-elect Trump can do it, Biden could have done it for the past year. Shame on him and Blinken and the rest of them. What was he telling us, though? For the past, all the way up until November, till Election Day, that we have to elect Kamala Harris. And before that, he was campaigning de facto for Biden, interfering as a Brit in American politics on behalf of the Democratic Party. Maybe he wanted his show back at MSNBC. I don't know. But he was telling us that they would be so much better on Palestine than Donald Trump. And now he's saying that he was the wise one, declaring that, Biden could have used his leverage, but didn't want to. And so I fact checked him and noted that he spent last October shaming Jill Stein voters for seeking to hold Biden and Blinken and Kamala accountable for the genocide they were carrying out, and promised them that Trump will be even worse than Biden on Gaza. Here it is. I mean, for anyone who doubts Trump will be even worse than Biden on Gaza, here's Trump saying Netanyahu's doing a good job. Biden's trying to hold him back and probably should be doing the opposite. I'm glad that Bibi decided to do what he had to do. I mean, Trump has said some horrible things. He used Palestinian, just the term Palestinian, as an insult, as a pejorative. He obviously is very close to Miriam Adelson. Elon Musk, who kicked in $250 million to his campaign, seems to have fallen under the influence of Israel as well. There's no reason to doubt that Donald Trump will be horrible on Palestine, but look what just happened. And consider what happened before the negotiations on Korea, when Trump promised fire and fury would rain down on Rocket Man Kim Jong-un in North Korea. That was just him attempting the madman theory of Kissinger to negotiate more favorable terms. And then the next thing you know, he's exchanging letters of praise with Kim and meeting with him personally and heroically, I should add. Anything, I think there's so much, should we call it, institutional osmosis towards Zionism in Washington that Donald Trump is less likely to have a meeting with a Hamas leader like that, as Jimmy Carter attempted to do. But with Trump, you just never know what's going to happen. And so all of these liberal pundits who were trying to shame everyone for trying to punish Kamala Harris for embracing the Gaza policy of the Biden administration that caused the Holocaust of our time are just, they should be so ashamed of themselves right now. This is such a moment of accountability for them as well. And yet they won't just accept it and say, hey, I was a little bit wrong. It's good to see this happening. Instead, they're just lying about their record.
With Trump, you also get moments of rare honesty from the highest position in the land. I mean, he's previously said, this is, I believe, before he was president the first time, but he talked about, actually, no, sorry, it was after he was president. He said that it was Netanyahu who didn't want a deal, a peace deal with Palestine, that he realized that in office that it was actually Israel standing in the way of a peace deal. And he had thought otherwise coming in. And then more recently in the debate with Kamala Harris, he corrected either Kamala or one of the moderators when he said that it's Israel that doesn't want to stop this war in Gaza, you know, and again, that was contradicting the line coming from the Biden administration that Israel was not the obstacle. So with him, you actually sometimes get the truth blurted out. And that will be something that I think will continue because now he feels even less unfiltered, given that he has such a big mandate and no one is bothering to trying to challenge him, at least from his own party anymore. So it will be interesting. And certainly anybody who tried to shame people into voting for the party facilitating a genocide, now seeing Trump apparently pushing through a peace deal, it should be a humbling moment. And I'm not surprised that people like Mehdi, who were just so, they really try to shame people over this issue. I'm not surprised that they still show no shame themselves, even now that it looks like Trump played a role in pushing through the ceasefire.
He recently tweeted like Jill Stein hasn't tweeted anything about Syria or said anything about Syria. It's like, what kind of puerile commentary is that? Things are going well in Syria now? Like, yeah. Should Jill Stein should she be apologizing for her stance on Syria? Which, by the way, was pretty. It was like her stance on Syria was pretty all over the place. It was inconsistent. It's admittedly, it's not the easiest issue to get a grasp of. It takes some sustained research that not everybody has time for. But certainly, he's trying to berate her for opposing the U.S. supporting an insurgency dominated by Al Qaeda. All right. Well, I mean, he has said nothing about 6 of Syria's reservoirs being seized by the Israeli military, 40% of its water supply. Israel setting up checkpoints all across the Golan. I mean, everybody's just kind of moved on from that. But yeah, I think there's more analysis we should get out of the way here about the ceasefire. And again, we're not apologizing for Trump. It's kind of a wait and see moment, but it's very clear the ceasefire came into being because there was a change in the administration, and the Biden administration had been sabotaging it ever since they put it on the table on May 26th. Now, May 26th was a key date in 2024 because it was just days after the International Court of Justice issued its decision, remarkable decision, declaring that Israel was engaged in a process of genocide in the Gaza Strip and ordering it not to invade Rafah. So the ceasefire was put there in many ways to blunt the impact of the ICJ decision. And then the Biden administration, and they've openly said this, Blinken has openly said this, began negotiating with Israel about how they would invade Rafah. So it was to kneecap the International Court of Justice that they first introduced the ceasefire. Then behind the scenes, they knew exactly what horrors were taking place inside the Gaza Strip. And this is all now coming out through our mainstream media, through like the most mainstream and I would say pro-Democratic Party outlets in the country. ProPublica, I think, has done some of the best reporting on this because they're getting the sources from inside the State Department. A lot of them are anonymous sources. They're generally not going to come talk to the Grayzone. Brett Murphy is the reporter from ProPublica. This is a thread of him summarizing his latest report on what took place inside Blinken's State Department. It came out on January 15th. It's worth reading in full. This is the human rights atrocity of our time. One senior official at State told me, I work for the department that's responsible for this policy. I signed up for this. I don't deserve sympathy for it. In November, Murphy says State Department human rights leaders met with one of Blinken's top lieutenants and begged the administration to follow through on a threat to cut off arms to Israel for blocking humanitarian assistance. And what happened? They're basically told to go screw themselves. All year, senior leaders repeatedly disregarded their own experts behind the scenes. They cracked down on leaks. This is incredible. By threatening criminal investigations and classifying material that was critical of Israel. So basically making it impossible for the public to see State Department expert analysis showing that Israel was using US weapons to carry out hideous atrocities. Some of the agency's highest-ranking Middle East diplomats complained in private that they were sidelined by Biden's National Security Council. That would be Brett McGurk and Jake Sullivan, who basically took over the policy. Here's State's top Palestinian affairs official on why he's been largely absent from the public eye. And he's just basically saying that the NSC told them to all shut up. And another point, leadership passed out NSC's list of banned words to government employees. They were not allowed to use words like Palestinian residents of Jerusalem. There are 350,000 Palestinians living under occupation in Jerusalem. And they had to instead use non-Israeli residents of Jerusalem. They were given total deference to Israel was given on the killing of an American citizen, Shireen Abu Akleh, the most famous reporter for Al Jazeera, who was killed by an Israeli sniper in Nablus, as well as kids who said they were abused in the Russian compound in Jerusalem, including like a 12-year-old girl. These were suppressed by the State Department.
Where Jeremy Lafredo, I believe, was detained, right? Our colleague at the Grayzone, when he was abducted by the Israeli military, I believe that's where he was held.
Thank you for pointing that out. Jeremy was held and abused in the Russian compound in Jerusalem, which is an Israeli torture center in the middle of Jerusalem. And he said that he heard Palestinians being tortured in adjacent cells, just screaming. On and on and on. I mean, I think the thread goes on for quite a while. 60 Minutes also had a special. The timing of it was pretty interesting. I'll get into that in a second. But it's worth watching. Hala Rarit, who was actually on the comms team of Matt Miller, the communications team at the State Department. She is one of the whistleblowers who actually quit the State Department and came out with the full details of how Blinken and Biden's NSC were doing everything possible to cover up for Israel's crimes and prevent a ceasefire. This went out loud. Yeah, and Josh Paul also was one of the key whistleblowers who was dealing with arms policy for the State Department, also resigned because he saw what Israel was doing with the weapons, and he was featured in that report. That report was filmed 8 months ago, right as the ceasefire was put on the table. What happened? It sat there for 8 months, and 60 Minutes waited to drop it until it would not matter, until a ceasefire was already about to be signed, so that the Biden administration wouldn't feel pressured, and so that it wouldn't make Kamala look bad and hurt her with the Democratic Party base that was wildly in favor of a ceasefire. So that's another good example of how media is, how we basically are watching regime media when we watch corporate media. But they did come out with a report that validates everything we've been saying on this stream for the past year and a half or so. And these are brave people. Most other people in the State Department just stayed there and delivered anonymous complaints and anonymous testimony to reporters. They're going to try to stay in their jobs under the Trump administration too.
they could have made that report 2 weeks into October 7th, because it was already clear then what Israel was going to do and what the Biden administration was going to do. And certainly everyone inside government knew exactly what was going on. On the issue of the Biden administration going out of their way to classify material related to Israel for obvious reasons, because it shows their criminality and complicity with Israel. Politically, for the Trump administration, if they're thinking just cynical political calculations, it would look great for them if they would declassify all this material, because it would show what barbarians their predecessors were. And it would underscore to everyone who didn't know already that the Biden administration was complicit in one of the worst crimes ever. And of course, Trump probably won't do that because they're on board with Israel. But it just speaks to how unfortunate it is that we have a two-party system that is in lockstep with Israel, and how the public is just kept unaware. So all this classified material about what our government did might not be known until long after we're all gone. You know, it's usually how it goes, where 60, 70 years later, that's when the truth can finally be disclosed. But if the Trump administration was smart, even just politically speaking, they would declassify that. They'd say people have the right to know about what this government just did.
Yeah. And the JFK files.
Oh, yeah. Well, that actually might come if Trump is to be believed. But yeah.
Well, another reason why, I mean, we haven't really addressed why the Biden administration didn't want a ceasefire when they could have ended this. We now see that it could have all been ended with a phone call. And I actually interviewed a Hamas official I actually interviewed him on October 7th, 2024 in Istanbul. Osama Hamdan, who is involved in the negotiating process and is a spokesman for Hamas in Beirut. And he insisted that they had accepted the deal in May. They've been accepting this deal since May, but that Israel keeps changing, moving the goalposts, and the U.S. lets Israel do whatever it wants. Now, Biden and Kamala Harris after him were being harmed dramatically by their support for this genocide among their own base as Kamala fought for to become president. There's a new YouGov poll out today. I think it was sponsored by IMEU, the Institute for Middle East Understanding, showing that a plurality of Democratic voters said that, a majority of those who did not vote for Kamala, who were registered Democrats, said that Gaza was a major reason. So why would they overlook that? Why would they overlook U.S. law like the Leahy law? Why would they overlook the mass slaughter of children? Why would they not want to deliver all of the hostages and captives, including Hirsch, Goldberg, Pollan, the ones who were American dual citizens, to a ceremony on the White House lawn during the summer at the height of the election campaign? This would have been great for Biden and Kamala Harris. Why didn't they want to do that? Why were they willing to sacrifice them and the tens of thousands of people who were slaughtered in the Gaza Strip? It could be 200,000 who were killed for all we know. We don't have a full tally because so many are still under the rubble. The reason is that they loved this war. And if you watched Matt Miller's comments, I didn't actually grab them in our pre-production for this stream, but I was at the briefing yesterday, and Matthew Miller said basically that we needed to weaken Hamas, we needed to weaken Hezbollah, and we liked seeing Hamas. This is almost his exact words. We liked seeing Hamas's ally in Syria be wiped off the map. He actually said wiped off the map. So the reason that they were obstructing the ceasefire was that they liked what Israel was doing in the region, and they wanted Netanyahu to change the map of the region and to bludgeon through genocidal force all of the axes of resistance until they were destroyed completely, and the only thing left to take place would be their version of regional integration, which is a peace among the undemocratic and rich, a peace between Israel and the medieval Gulf monarchies. That's what they've always wanted. That's what the Abraham Accords was. And Netanyahu promised that he would do that. at the UN and in Congress, and it started to happen. This is what they actually thought was happening in Lebanon when the Israelis began really attacking harshly in Lebanon and assassinating leadership there. And I mean, this is a tweet by me in October, on October 1st. Amazing how the Biden administration picking former Israeli tank pilot Amos Hochstein to avert a war in Lebanon wound up with Hochstein green lighting an Israeli war while Biden drooled and stared off at the waves in Rehoboth. So basically, the Biden administration escalated the war in Lebanon, and Israel was beginning to escalate in Syria already in late September, early October, which meant there could not be a ceasefire in Gaza because they liked what Netanyahu was doing, killing Nasrallah, destroying Hezbollah munitions. And Politico even said so. U.S. military officials quietly backed Israel's military push against Hezbollah. The timing was right for such a military shift, they concluded. Amos Hochstein and Brett McGurk, this is from the National Security Council, told top Israeli officials in recent weeks that the U.S. agreed with Netanyahu's broad strategy to shift Israel's military focus to the north against Hezbollah in order to convince the group to engage in diplomatic talks to end the conflict. So they're basically saying that escalation will lead to de-escalation. This was their strategy. And in order to escalate, you have to sabotage the ceasefire at every possible turn. Through assassinations, the pager attack, they loved that. They loved the pager attack. They endorsed the assassination of Nasrallah. And the offensive by HTS, rebranded Al-Qaeda in Syria, was already being planned at this point, and the U.S. knew all about it, the one that would storm into Aleppo and take over Damascus by December. So everyone in Gaza had to be sacrificed, including the captives and hostages. Yeah. This is why, for a cynical, sadistic, and honestly satanic geopolitical strategy of changing the regional dynamics through the Israeli Air Force. And that's why they kept the bombs flowing.
And this goes back to the Bush administration, which marked Syria for regime change right after 9/11, according to General Wesley Clark. And Brett McGurk served in that administration, and especially after the 2006 war, when Israel failed to defeat Hezbollah, a major reason why Hezbollah held off was because of the weapons they received through Syria. And that's when the Bush administration ramped up its effort to overthrow the Syrian government. There's cables from that period released by WikiLeaks showing that U.S. Embassy in Damascus was talking about exploiting Syria's vulnerability to what it called Islamic extremism, which turned out to be groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And that's when Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice was talking about the birth pangs of a new Middle East. It's because they recognized that Hezbollah was able to defend its country against Israeli aggression via allies like Syria. That's why Syria had to be destroyed. So Brett McGurk and Jake Sullivan and Amos Hochstein, they're just continuing what the Bush administration started. Of course, it goes back way before then, but in terms of this being like a concerted, dedicated U.S. policy where they're going to put muscle behind it and a lot of money and work with their allies in the Gulf to see this come to effect. This was them trying to fulfill that vision. This was them seizing that moment to fulfill a vision that was, cast a long time ago.
Absolutely. And in between, the destruction of Libya, the destruction of Syria, all the countries on the hit list.
Yeah, and then using the destruction of Libya to help with the goal in Syria, because the weapons that the Syrian insurgents were getting, especially at the start of the Syria war, were coming from where? They were coming from the looted stockpile of the government that the U.S. helped overthrow inside Libya.
Exactly. So none of this would have been possible with the ceasefire. If it had happened in May, none of that destruction in the region would have been possible. And for Netanyahu, regional war propped up his coalition and boosted his popularity, which had plummeted after October 7th. So it was good for him as well. Now, this is also something that Matt Miller, spokesman for Tony Blinken, said in his final briefing, which I think is true. A lot of what Matt Miller says is a lot more candid and honest than Tony Blinken. Or maybe it's just hard to pay attention to Blinken because he's so uncharismatic. But he said that on October 16th, with the killing of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who was killed without the Israeli military knowing that they had killed him. He was actually fighting in the field with his men while Netanyahu was cowering in a luxury bunker and having F-35s shadow his personal jet. Sinwar was killed fighting in the field, having not eaten for 3 days with his men. And Miller said this should have been the moment when there could have been a ceasefire. This is when we could have had the ceasefire. That's kind of when the Biden administration decided to move towards a ceasefire proposal. But at the same time, and as I said at the time, negotiating a ceasefire would be very difficult, if not impossible, when you've killed the one figure who has to approve it. And remember, Israel killed all the previous negotiators before Sinwar, who were negotiating from the outside. Salah Arori was killed in his office in Beirut. He wasn't a militant. He was just a Hamas official whose name was on all the negotiations in Doha. They just assassinated him. And then Ismail Haniyeh, in an attempt to provoke Iran, was killed in his hotel room in Tehran at the inauguration of Pezeshkian, the Iranian president. And so they killed all the negotiators while Biden and Blinken are blaming Hamas. How many negotiators did Hamas kill? They're blaming Hamas for obstructionism and rejectionism. And Miller and Blinken have acknowledged this. So it was harder to get a deal. So it took a while for them to get the ceasefire in order. It basically took until Donald Trump was poised to take office, which denied them the political win, the PR propaganda win that they had sought for getting the deal. And also, they had to get Netanyahu to stand down, and they weren't going to do it because they never applied pressure. It was Trump who applied the pressure. So that's why it took this long. It really is, if you look at this chronologically and analyze how they obstructed this deal and why they did it, it tells the story of incompetence and pure evil. And it's a story that needs to be told in even greater detail with more sources. Hopefully there'll be, books and documentaries about it. The same way that we remember the evil and incompetence of the Bush administration in Iraq. And what's so evil is that so many people would still be with us today. I mean, just let's just take all the context away from October 7th and be stupid for a second and say, oh, Hamas started this war. Well, there still could have been a deal, and it could have been worked out by, at the latest, May. It could have been worked out right away, honestly. And you're muted.
The initial offer from Hamas immediately was, we'll release all the captives if you agree not to invade Gaza. That was conveyed back in October, according to a representative of the families, of the Israeli hostage families. And of course, Netanyahu refused to do that. So there was a deal even available immediately, but it was ignored by Israel with the backing of the U.S.
Exactly. The October 7th operation was structured to make a deal feasible and possible from the beginning. It was the only leverage that Hamas had after being designated as a terrorist organization and placed under siege. If only they had been treated as well as the Al-Qaeda administration that has taken Damascus by force is being currently treated. We wouldn't be in this position. But even if this had all happened, there still could have been a deal in May because it's the same exact one that was just accepted, the same exact one, and so many people would still be alive. And that's what's so evil about this. Even if we're going to look at it from a conservative, decontextualized, ahistorical perspective. And that's why I'm so outraged, and why I just feel nothing but anger today. I don't feel like I should satisfaction having confronted Blinken, because we should have never been in this place. It's just hard to fathom that level of evil and stupidity, but that's what we've come to expect. Anything else we should cover? Or, I mean, Biden gave his farewell address today.
I wanted to actually get you to respond to how you were characterized in the Times of Israel, covering your intervention today. Let's see here. This is how the Times of Israel covered your intervention. Okay, my screen is freezing, so I'm not gonna show it just because it's.
Well, if you just throw it in the, just message it to me in the.
Well,
chat.
I'll just read it to you. Okay, this is the Times of Israel. Engaging in an apparent anti-Semitic dog whistle, Blumenthal claimed that Blinken's grandfather was an Israel lobbyist, adding, quote, "Are you compromised by Israel?" So they're accusing you of engaging in an apparent anti-Semitic dog whistle by pointing out that Blinken's grandfather was an Israel lobbyist, and then asking the question, I think a very fair one, are you compromised by Israel? That, according to Times of Israel, is anti-Semitic.
Let me see if I can pull up the book that he published, because it'll tell the whole story. But the reporter might have been so stupid that they didn't even know that.
Oh, you know what? Actually, look, I know you're talking. Well, Dave DeCamp posted something from Blinken's obituary from the grandfather Blinken.
Well, here's the New York Times before you put that up. This is his obituary of Maurice Blinken.
Yeah.
Early backer of Israel. I mean, they're anti-Semitic dog whistle from the New York Times.
Yeah, early. Right. Yeah, and that obituary says this. This is a quote from it. So this is Blinken's institute. He was the founder of the American Palestine Institute after World War II, which in real life was the institute to convert Palestine into Israel. And the New York Times says Blinken's institute's report is said to have helped persuade the U.S. government to support the establishment of the state of Israel. So how is it anti-Semitic to call this guy an Israel lobbyist when his own obituary in the Times credits his lobbying for founding the state of Israel and helping the U.S. recognize it? Anyway.
Well, I'm glad they brought that up. I mean, this is part of the point of the intervention, is to get this conversation going, to educate people about this. And, if you're going to attack me and accuse me of anti-Semitism, I'm going to back up my statement with facts, or other people like Dave DeCamp are going to do that. And I think, that raises the level of consciousness and helps educate people about how compromised Tony Blinken is. And he's boasted about this. He said at a 2006 meeting of AIPAC, for example, that his commitment to Israel's strength comes to him through his ancestry, or through his family's heritage of being involved in the Israeli project. So it's something Blinken has boasted about. I think that should be disqualifying for someone in a top diplomatic position. Imagine a Muslim American saying something like that about Pakistan, or a Japanese American who declares some loyalty to the Japanese nationalist project and goes and prays at a nationalist shrine to war criminals who were killed in World War II or prosecuted. I mean, they would be disqualifying for them. Yeah. But, something else is going on here. And I also confronted Blinken as a Jew, because I think he has harmed our faith community by associating it with such levels of evil and fascism while identifying as a Jew. I'm disgusted with him. And, us anti-Zionist Jews we're left to clean up that mess in a mostly Gentile society. It's very damaging. It's very dangerous what he did. And, he knows who I am. He knows me. I hope he, I don't know if he has anything inside him, if he has any conscience, but I hope he thinks about that one and what he's done.
Well, again, let me just again express my gratitude to you and Sam Husseini for that intervention today. For a lot of people, it was cathartic to see Blinken, the face of this genocide from the U.S. government's perspective, being challenged on it and ruining what he thought, I think, would be a moment of triumph for him, appearing before a room full of journalists and therefore pretending as if he's committed to free speech and freedom of expression and a free press. And instead, having that final appearance, that swan song, being defined by that confrontation, being called out for the genocide that he's facilitated. And the whole mirage of his whole shtick of being a diplomat, putting on a suit every day, going around the world, doing all these photo ops. He loves to brag about how he flies all around the world, logging miles everywhere. Doing what? Facilitating mass murder. And that's what he was called out for today. So thank you, Max, and thank you, Sam Husseini, for challenging him over that. It was wonderful to see.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And thank you. I mean, you had the quiet car confrontation with Chris Coons, and this isn't over. We're not going home, even though there is a ceasefire or whatever it is. We're not going home. We won't stop. I wouldn't say I stepped away, but I hadn't been focused on Israel-Palestine with the same level of intellectual and political intensity as I had years before, until this war erupted. And so, and I know you feel the same.
Yeah.
It's kind of reinvigorated me in a lot of ways. And it brought me together with a lot of new activists and a new generation. And we're not going home. These people are still out there. They need to be held accountable. And a lot has to be done. We couldn't do it without all of you out there. So thank you again for your support, for liking this stream, for subscribing. We're also on Substack now. And also sign up for Aaron's newsletter at Substack. Where can they do that?
Mate.substack.com. And it's great that Grayzone is now on Substack because, as you all know from watching it, the reporting that is done at Grayzone is it's peerless. And I know there's been some new reports recently on so many other issues that we haven't had time to cover, but we'll definitely continue to cover, especially with a new administration taking office. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. It's going to be, well, we don't have time to talk about what it's going to be, but look forward to seeing Mark Zuckerberg and his new makeover, the administration front and center. Anyway, I'm pretty much tapped out at this point. And, we'll definitely be back next week. And so that thanks again, Aaron, and thank you to you all. Again, hit the like button, subscribe, support any way you can, and see you all soon. Peace.